I want to talk about a few things today. One of the things I wanted to talk about, first of all, was hi, Beverly. Nice to see you. One of the things I want to talk about today was this civil war that's happening in the MAGA party, specifically between, hi, Chuck, nice to meet you, specifically between sort of people like, thanks for the love heart, specifically between people like Tucker Carlson and people in that sort of side of it. They're criticizing Trump because of Trump's close relationship to Israel. And basically, they're saying that, these people consider themselves, America first. That's how they try to make it out to be. People like Tucker Carlson, there's another person like, is a comedian called Dave Smith, who appears on the Joe Rogan show a lot. He's friends with Joe Rogan. He had a debate recently with Douglas Murray and all that stuff. So these people have big audiences in the online space. They have massive supporters in the MAGA movement, and that's why I think it's important to sort of see what's happening inside their movement. Hi, Richard. Nice to see you. Anna, good to see you, Anna. And so I've been looking at what they've been saying. Now, this particular movement, this probably includes Joe Rogan as well, like Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, these type of people who consider themselves anti-war, although, it's more complicated than that. Tucker Carlson, in my opinion, should never be taken seriously. But unfortunately, the reason I do talk about him and write about him on my Substack newsletter is because he's so influential in the MAGA movement. If anyone was going to win, if Trump doesn't run again in 2028, which he'd probably try, hi, Shauna, I think it would probably be Tucker Carlson. If he wanted to run, he would probably get the nominee as the next MAGA leader. And he would probably be supported by a lot of the MAGA base because the MAGA base really like him. The MAGA base don't like people like Marco Rubio. They think he's too establishment, all that sort of stuff. But they do like, or even JD Vance, but they do love Tucker Carlson. So Tucker Carlson is somebody to watch in the future as a possible next leader of the MAGA movement, or maybe even something aligned to the MAGA movement that he'll create his own brand. But it will be a brand based on the MAGA movement, and he'll probably try to come across as saying that Trump was never really MAGA. He was never really America first, and I'm America first. So they'll almost try to create an off branch of the MAGA movement using the same base. And I do think it could work. And this is why I think it could work, because Trump is copying for the first time. We all know that MAGA is a cult, right? We all know this is the biggest cult that's ever existed in the United States. And because of that, it's very hard for them to break with Donald Trump, right? Most of them are not going to break with Donald Trump. Many of them will stay loyal to Donald Trump. We saw the same thing happening with Elon Musk when Elon Musk and Trump had that falling out, the bromance part, died. Like, that was a sad day for all of us. There was tears for all of us. We were all crying because of that broke up. Yeah, not really, but it was fun to watch that sort of drama, theatrics of it and things like that. But there is something happening in the MAGA movement that we haven't seen in the last 10 years. And that's, we're seeing almost like a third party trying to be created here. And it's possibly a couple of things going on. One is Trump is very good at being the opposition leader. And I've said this many times before. So when he was opposing Biden, he got a big fan base, right? Because he would just, every time Biden did something or something happened that had nothing to do with Biden, Trump was very effective at blaming everything on Biden and saying that would have never happened under me, right? He always says there was no wars that happened under me in 2016. Now, again, that's another lie. But a lot of these people, hi Miranda, good to see you. Tamela, good to see you. A lot of these people bought the lie that Trump is somehow this anti-war candidate. And that's people like Tucker Carlson, although Tucker Carlson I think is more of a grifter, but Dave Smith, Joe Rogan, all these people online, right, who have, and again, the reason I talk about them is because they have massive, massive audiences, specifically in the young male group between 18 and 45. And it's a group that Democrats are losing. In fact, the 18 to 29-year-olds is one of the biggest groups that Democrats lost at the last election, which is very unusual because that particular demographic usually votes, right, for Democrats. And for the first time, the 18 to 29-year-old, including blacks, including Hispanics, did vote for Republicans, specifically for Trump, because they told a story, and that story that Trump told was not just his story, but the people who, hi Steve, a lot of people who bought that story, the BS, were people like Joe Rogan, Dave Smith, a lot of people in this online space, Tucker Carlson, and they sold the story to their audiences, which is mostly those demographics. So the Democrats do need to get that base back. To win at the next election, they don't have to have it, but it would make things a lot easier because that's a demographic that usually votes Democrats. I think there's many ways to get them back, but I'll go back to that later. But as I was saying, this particular group specifically voted for him, this online right sort of group that maybe 10 years ago were voting Democrats, right? These people who might have been sympathetic to, say, Bernie Sanders and then moved over. One of the reasons they like Trump, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons, one is they fell for his lies, but the other one is they thought he was anti-war. Now, if you look between 2016 and 2020, when Trump was actually in power, it's a very different story that he's anti-war. First of all, when he first comes in, he's bombing Syria. Whether you agree with it or not, I'm not making an assessment about whether he shouldn't be because, there was ISIS there, but I'm just talking about the fact that's coming from these people who say he's anti-war. He's bombing Syria for the first 6 months in 2016. Then he increases drone strikes by 400%, right? On top of what Obama was doing. So Obama received a lot of criticism for drone strikes, including amongst these groups, but Trump increased them by 400% on top of Obama. Not only did he increase drone strikes, under Obama, if a civilian died or was killed, the government had to report that, right? So they had to report civilian deaths. Under Trump, he brought in a new law that stopped reporting civilian deaths from drone strikes. So he took the transparency away. Now, again, a lot of these people like Joe Rogan and all this sort of stuff, they're big on transparency, freedom of speech, all that sort of stuff, the government's right. But they miss this, right? They completely miss this. And I think one of the reasons, hi Jenny, one of the reasons they miss this is because once people buy the lie that someone is anti-war or all this sort of stuff, or Trump's against cancel culture and all that sort of stuff, they just put the filters on, and then anything that happens, they just ignore, or they're not even paying attention because they're in an echo chamber. So these things are not anti-war, right? Trump also was a big supporter of Saudi Arabia between 2016 and 2020, to the point that he funded them. Like, this was happening under Democrats before, but he escalated this to a massive level to fund Saudi Arabia to bomb Yemen, right? And the Houthis and all that, which resulted in a massive famine at that time, right? When Biden came in, he de-escalated that support. So again, that's not anti-war, right? How can you sit there and criticize Biden for supporting Ukraine, right? Who've been invaded by Russia, right? So they've been invaded. There's no boots on the ground, no American boots on the ground, right? Ukraine are the victims here. Putin is the person. But on the other hand, you have Saudi Arabia, whatever you think of that situation. But America's supporting, hi Thomas, hi Alice, America's supporting Saudi Arabia, supplying them with weapons, was even helping them bomb, all that sort of stuff with intelligence. But they don't see that, right? They still think that they don't know about it. In fact, if you speak to most MAGA people, they don't even know about that stuff because they're living in oblivion world where none of this stuff happened on Trump. Most Trump supporters don't know, right, that Trump increased drone strikes by 20%, by 400%. Sorry, most of them don't know it. So that's how they got away with it. So you fast forward to now, right? Trump's during the election, he's saying, look, all the blame, right? All the blame should be put on Biden for the war in Ukraine. All the blame should be put on Biden for what happened with Israel and Palestine. So, hi, Cara, nice to see you. So Trump wanted to put the blame on that. Thank you. Thanks for the love hearts. Put all the blame on Trump for that, for Biden. So, and that's what Trump is really good at. He's good at being the opposition, and he constantly will say that would never have happened under me. That would never have happened under me, right? And that's an interesting thing to say because you can't say it's wrong. I mean, you can say it's wrong, and you can say it's right, but there's no way to prove either way. You know what I mean? Hi, Peter. So you can't prove that Trump is right or wrong. So it's just a stupid thing to say, right? So, but but he repeats it over and over again, and people like Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan and Dave Smith, all these like right wing comedian type people with big audiences, were just they started believing that. Well, he's saying the right things, right? He's saying the wars didn't happen under me, bang, 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 right? So first of all, they bought the whole. First of all, he wasn't a free. He wasn't anti-war between 2016 and 2020. That was a lie, right? He also went after Julian Assange a lot harder than any Democrat ever did. In fact, Mike Pompeo, there were reports that he actually wanted to assassinate Julian Assange under Trump, right? So again, all these people, free speech people, the Joe Rogans, all that, but they give him a pass for that. Under Biden, Julian Assange, Julian Assange, as you know, is an Australian. Um, so Australia did a deal with the United States to release Julian Assange from prison, right? That was done last year. It was done with our current Prime Minister, who's a supporter of Julian Assange. He's a centre-left person. And so basically he was released with a deal between Joe Biden and thing. Now, again, all these people on the right who are big supporters of Julian Assange, right, gave no credit to Joe Biden for releasing, right? Gave no and ignored the fact that under Trump, Mike Pompeo wanted to go after him. Now, that report about the Trump administration wanted to kill Julian Assange came from Julian Assange's brother. So I don't know if it's true or not, but it's Julian Assange's brother who's saying that. So again, this is the madness of the MAGA movement and the Joe Rogan and the Dave Smith, Tucker Carlson. Like they're siding with the side which is 100 times worse, right? Went after Julian Assange, the person they think is a freedom person, right? And then gets released with Joe Biden, right? And then you got this person, Trump and all that. So now that now we're like months into the Trump election, and the war in Palestine is still going. The war in Ukraine is still going. Remember Trump. Remember, hi, the bathrobe guy. Nice to see. All the wars are still going. Trump said he was going to finish those wars in 24 hours, right? And basically, they didn't finish in 24 hours. In fact, he just all he does, he keeps saying, he repeats this over again, which is getting like almost comical. Is there's a deal just around the corner. It's always like 2 weeks. In 2 weeks from now. I'm talking with him next week. We'll be talking next week. It's always like next week, right? It's like the person who owes you rent or money. Greetings, everyone. Peace and metta to all. Yes. Thank you, bathroom guy. Namaste. So basically, I think I think that whole movement fell for that whole movement. Hi, Anya, nice to see you. And I think a lot of that stuff on the right, falling for all that stuff. It's hard to believe that now that Israel is bombing Iran. Thank you, bathroom guy. And basically, now that they're bombing that, it's like they've gone too far. So the first thing that sort of started getting the MAGA base a little bit. Now, remember, hi, Giles, from Canada. Is it Canada? Yeah. Or Ukraine? Yeah. But yeah, basically, I think that the MAGA base is splintering a bit. Now, it's important to say that when you have a base this cultish, you're never going to get rid of the whole MAGA base, but you can't. There are certainly elements and people people with big audiences like Dave Smith, Tucker Carlson, who are going after MAGA. It's interesting that initially, when they were going after the MAGA movement or the Trump administration, they didn't hire the crack piston. They didn't actually name Donald Trump by name. They blamed the people around Trump, right? That's the great thing about being Donald Trump. Even when he's the leader of the Republican Party, it's such a cult that they can't bring themselves to mention Trump by name. So they'll blame the people advising Trump. It's like, the people around Trump are telling him to bomb Iran and do this and that. And he doesn't really want to do it because he's like a peaceful dude, you know what I mean? Like, and it's like, that's the impression they want to give you. So either he's really weak and and which isn't a great impression anyway, because you're basically saying the president of the United States is so weak that he can't come up with any of his own decisions, right? So he's so easily manipulated, right? Or he's actually agreeing with it and they don't want to blame him because they're worried they'll get too much backlash from the MAGA audiences, right? The cracked piston, he has zero comprehension of foreign policy. Yeah, 100%. Um, he wouldn't have a clue. I don't think, like, I'm in Australia. I don't think if you gave him a map, he wouldn't know where Australia is. To be fair, a lot of people would know where Australia is, but you know what I'm saying. Like, I think years ago, he was talking about Austria, right? But he actually meant Australia, and it was like, oh, yeah, it was really weird. And I was like, then he started talking about Europe, and I was like, we're not in Europe, we're in like Asia, like anyway. But yeah, he hasn't got a clue, right, about geography or he doesn't. All even the people around him, even the people who liked him, say he doesn't like reading policy. He doesn't like reading. He doesn't like reading in general. I don't think he's a big reader, right? He just wants to watch Fox News. That's how he gets his news. Like, he just wants to sit down and watch someone like Fox News tell him what he wants to hear. Um, yeah, so he's just a reality TV star. At the end of the day, that's what he is, reality TV star. He hires people around him who are mostly from Fox News, who he thinks, he probably thinks, oh, you know what, they're good on TV. So I'm going to hire them as a health minister, or I'm going to hire them as a defense, Pete Hegseth. You know, he was on Fox News, so I'll get people who know how to communicate or whatever. So he's always thinking like a reality TV star. But again, I think at the moment, this group is splintering more than I've ever seen. And unlike a lot of people in our side, I do spend a little bit of time in that MAGA world, like online on Twitter and stuff like that. So I know that world quite well. And I've never seen this in 10 years, what I'm seeing right now. It's definitely not completely broken because I said it's a cult, but it's way more than I've ever seen before. And that's because so many of the people at the top, like with Joe Rogan's and all that, they're pushing back quite hard against Trump now. It started with going against MAGA, and now recently they're actually attacking Trump himself, and that's really unusual. As I said before, it's usually blaming the people around Trump, but now they're going after him directly. That's unusual. So I still see a lot of his followers online defending him and things like that, or saying, well, I don't like this, but I still like his immigration policies, that sort of thing. So I don't know how effective it will be, but I do know, hi Nancy, I do know that one of the reasons Trump did well in the Rust Belt states and all those states is because he picked up a lot of the working class people. That was some of the biggest areas. And a lot of those people are males, right? And a lot of those people, they follow people. Hi, Louise. They follow people like Joe Rogan and all that, and Dave Smith and all these, and Tucker Carlson, right? That's one of the biggest demographics. So if they turn against Trump, he's going to lose a significant amount of that core demographic that he picked up that Democrats usually get, right? Now, whether they go back to the Democrats, that's another thing, right? That because a lot of times what these people will say is, let's start a third party, because they don't want to go back to the Democrats, right? So, with Elon Musk, when he had his little tiff with Trump, he was like, let's start a third party. That's what they do, right? So it's not necessarily that they're going to go back to the Democrats. I do feel they could pick up a lot of Democrats if Democrats campaign better, especially amongst certain demographics like men and things like that. I think there's ways to get those people back, and that's basically to concentrate on economic things, because that's one of the reasons a lot of those people attracted to Andrew Tate and those toxic type figures is because, they've kind of fallen by the wayside. They might not have a good family life, whatever it is, and they're telling them what they want to hear, that it's not your fault, it's this person's fault, it's women's, all this sort of stuff. But if a Democrat told a better story, like, hey, what we're going to do is we're not going to talk about the culture wars. That's up to you to decide what you want to do. But we're going to build homes, right? We're going to build lots and lots of homes. And that means that young people, right, they can, more homes, right? The rents won't keep going up because you have more supply. More homes means that young people, right, will be able to buy a home because there's more supply, right? So straight away, just with an economic policy, you're going to bring back that demographic back to the Democrats and stay away from the culture wars. So you bring those people back. with economics. Homes, homes, homes. It's honestly the best policy the Democrats could ever do. What else does homes do? Okay, who builds homes, right? Who works in the building industry? Mostly men. Okay, not just men, but mostly men. Then you've got plumbers, electricians, carpenters. You've got working class people, right? So now you're pulling all those people in, right? On a not on culture wars, but just on one thing: homes. Homes brings people who want to go into the market, who want to buy homes but they can't afford it. People who are renting because it's too expensive. I agree, Joe. Thanks, Car. And then it brings in all the tradespeople who build the homes, right? It's like a smorgasbord of people who building homes is a positive for, right? And this is the core area that the Democrats lost at the last election. Because in America, unlike Australia, you have the electoral college system, which means you can't win without the Rust Belt states or the Sun Belt states, right? And those areas are working class areas. You have to win them back, right? And you're not going to win them back with the culture wars, right? And again, I will say that the Democrats never campaigned on the culture wars, but the Republicans pretended like they did, right? They were doing the Republicans were doing all these ads, right? These ads were all like, the trans ads that Republicans did. They were trying to paint the Democrats as being obsessed with woke to the point where they didn't care about people's everyday lived experience, like rents, housing, inflation, all that stuff, right? So the trans ad that a lot of people heard about during the election, where the ad said they spent hundreds of millions on this, a lot of people think it was effective. I'm not sure how effective it was, but I don't think it was effective because it was anti-trans. I think it was effective because they connected that ad, the trans thing, to the economy, right? And what they did is they said, "Hi, Suzanne. Hi, Dave." What they did is they said, the Democrats are for they, them, but we are for you, right? So what are they saying there? They're saying that Democrats are so obsessed with woke, which they weren't. They never talked about woke, but anyway, that's the way they did that on purpose. Is that the reason inflation's going up, the reason rent prices are going up, all this stuff that's happening economically to people during that period of time and now happened because Democrats don't care about that. They only care about woke. And so that was an effective ad economically, right? Not for what the reasons, right? So a good way to get around that, and I want to give Australia as an example, right, is that a centre-left government just a couple of months ago won by a landslide, and they weren't supposed to win by a landslide. And the centre-right government, because they started in addition to your beautiful accent, your discussion is spot on. Oh, thank you, Victoria. I'm glad you like my accent. Whenever I hear an Aussie accent on TV or movies, I feel like it sounds a bit crass. How you going, mate? How you going? Like Steve Irwin or, Paul, how you going, mate? Most of us don't talk like that, G'day, how you going? Like that's sort of a broad accent. Most of us who live you can hear that, but it's more in the rural areas. In the cities, people talk more like me now. But yeah, I think not at all. Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, I just think that basically, I think a good thing about it is that the Democrats at the next election can learn from what happens overseas. I think one of the problems with the Democratic Party is that they never look around the world to see what's happening in other countries, right? And what you notice in 2024 is that what happened in America happened all around the world. In Western countries, incumbent governments all around the world were getting kicked out, right? There's never been a year like 2024, right? I think Mexico was the only one that beat the trend, right? And the reason for that was because people blame the incumbent government on inflation, house prices. All Western countries are experiencing the same thing, right? And 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 the way that we got around that, because we were in the centre left party was in power during inflation, right? So we should have been kicked out based on that trend. Now, Trump winning the election actually helped the rest of the world become more left wing, right? So obviously in Canada, it made Mark Carney way more popular because he was talking about annexing them. They were behind 20 points, right? And because of Trump annexing, suddenly he won. I don't think there's a chance in hell he would have won that if it wasn't for Trump saying that stuff. Now, Trump's craziness came down to Australia. Our election was, I think, in March, April. So Trump, when he first got elected, there was a bit of momentum behind him. There was like Elon, there was a lot of and so even our centre right government in Australia was like jumping on the Trump train a little bit in the early stages, not later. And they started talking about bringing in a system like Doge, like a Doge similar system here. You could tell they were trying to mimic Trump a little bit, but not to the same degree because Trumpian would never take off in Australia. It's not our type of politics. Our politics is more bland, and that's the way we like it. We like bland politics. We don't want our politicians to be like reality TV stars. So, but they did try to take a little bit here and there from Trump and try to like jump on that sort of momentum when it first happened. But then when Trump started talking about annexing Canada and putting tariffs on, including Australia, Australia turned off. Even the percentage of people who like Trump hated Trump now, right? So the centre right party had to start backtracking, right? Oh no, we don't like Trump either, like they did in Canada, right? But by that stage, they'd already been like connected to him too much, and I like the fact that the centre left government was sticking up to Trump. They'll like he wasn't putting up with Trump's bullshit, so he got more popular, right? So again, he helped Australia centre left government win. He helped Canada win over there. So he's certainly helping the rest of the world turn liberal, right? But I think one of the things that Australia did well in the election that the Democrats could learn is they stayed away from the culture wars, which I know the Democrats did. But the centre-right party tried to use the culture wars against the centre-left party here too, because they've seen how successful it's been around the world. But what the centre-left government did differently here than what the Democrats did in America, all right, is that when the centre-left government in Australia was being painted as too woke or whatever, they said, we're not talking about woke. The only people here talking about woke are you guys, the right-wing party, right? You guys can't stop talking about it. You're obsessed with talking about woke. All I'm here to talk about is homes. I want to build homes. So young people who can't afford to rent can afford to rent. Young people who can't afford to buy a home can afford to buy a home. Tradespeople, carpenters, plumbers, builders, all these people who work around the building industry, I want them to have lots of work building homes, right? But if you want to talk about woke, you go right ahead because obviously you have no idea. You have no ideas to help the Australian economy, right? He flipped it. They completely flipped it on the right wing. In America, what happened is the Democrats got scared. So they stopped. So what they did is they didn't confront being attacked as being woke. So when those ads came out about they are for them, you, right? The Democrats ignored the ads. They ignored being called woke. They ignored all these other things and instead tried to pretend it wasn't happening. But when you do that in politics, you cede the ground to the other party. That other party will now be able to define you because you can't define yourself, right? So if the Democrats aren't fighting back against that, then you're basically putting your hands up, right? And you're saying, and then they get to decide whether you're woke or not. In Australia, they didn't let that happen. They turned it, they flipped it on there, and it was based on truth. Now, the Democrats could have done the same thing because they weren't fighting on woke. Democrats weren't talking about woke at all. In fact, they was not talking about woke so much, they ended up in the hands of Liz Cheney, right? That's not woke, right? So the actual truth was they weren't campaigning on woke, but the Republicans tried to make it that they showed videos of Kamala from 4 years ago, whatever. But again, they could have flipped that on Trump, right? They could have flipped and said, look, you guys are running hundreds of millions of dollars worth of ads on woke. We're not doing that. We're not doing pro-woke or anti-woke. We're talking about homes. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about all these type of things, right? And all you guys do is run ads on woke. You guys are obsessed with it. Flip it. You need to flip it. And the reason it will work, right, is because it's the truth. The only people who love talking about woke are MAGA and right-wing media like Fox News. If you switch over to Fox News, they talk about it all the time. I remember when Tucker Carlson, right, did a 10-minute monologue on woke M&Ms, right? Because M&Ms, right, brought in, they're usually like men, and they brought in some women M&Ms, like characters, right? And he was like, they're too woke, right? They've gone woke because they brought in woke M&Ms. And he did like a 10-minute monologue on woke M&Ms. That's insane. Like, how is that? Like, it's not crazy. Like, even if you think, right, it's slightly like, they just brought that in, M&M's brought that in to be woke or whatever. Even if you thought that, Doing a 10-minute monologue on that is a billion times worse. Like, why would you even care about something like that? But they find the smallest thing, right, to talk about woke. They're obsessed with it. And they will talk about Bud Light beer, right? One trans person gets a case of beer, right? Which would be like what? 0.001% of the marketing budget, right? And suddenly, hi Pat, suddenly it's like, Kid Rock shooting cans of beers on Bud Light beer. It's like 24/7 Fox News. Can you believe they gave one trans person this case of beer? It's like, wow, again, even if you don't like that, the reaction to it is so over the top. It's insane. So I just think, again, there's a much better story for people on the left in Western countries, right, to tell against, in terms of the woke thing. And this is the important bit, I will say. You don't have to throw trans people under the bus, right? Thank you. You don't have to throw a minority groups under the bus. You just don't have to make it your number one focus, right? It has to be economics. There was a book years ago called "It's the Economy Stupid," right? And the problem is these days is even worse because these days a lot of people don't pay attention. In the old days, you would go home at night and watch TV together, and half of America would be watching the same shows, right? Or hi Rhonda, or you'd be reading the same newspapers. Now, people are TikToking and they're not watching they're not watching news on TikTok. They're just watching funny stuff, whatever, right? Streaming services, right? They're watching. There's like a million different distractions you can do now, right? Gaming, hi Rhonda, all these sort of stuff you can do now that never used to exist. So trying to get eyeballs to Stuart, to follow you as a politician is extremely hard now because there's so many distractions and people are put off by politics. So you've got all these people who aren't paying attention to the politics. I want to give you an example. In America last year, Trump was getting indicted all the time, every day. You had the Jack Smith indictment with the fake set of electors, right, trying to overthrow the government, right? The biggest problem is lack of critical thinking. Yeah, I agree. But also the lack of critical thinking is the fact that they're not even they don't even want to, they're not even seeing the basics of the news. So many people don't even follow any news at all. Like they're not even following anything. So when they saw Trump, right, or when they do follow news, it's on the peripherals. It's like they might see something on TikTok that suddenly the algorithm sends them, but it's just like a one-off, right? So, so basically what it is they basically last year, you saw Trump showing up court every day. He was in court and then it was indictments. And then suddenly his polling started, didn't shoot up, but it just slightly went up, which I thought was unusual. Why is his polling slightly going up when all these indictments are happening against him, right? And he's showing up in court every day. And that's because Trump had been telling a narrative for a long time. And that narrative was, this is a witch hunt, right? The Democrats don't want me to run. Why don't they want me to run, right? And when you have people like us who are following the politics, it's like, what are you talking about? You're showing up in court because with the documents case, you're trying to hide the documents, right? But here's the thing we need to understand. Most people aren't looking at the details of the indictments. They're not looking at any of the details of the indictments, right? They see, when someone who doesn't follow politics, this is what they see, the documents case. They will hear that Joe Biden also had documents, right? And they will say, oh, Joe Biden had documents and Trump has documents. They're both as bad as each other, right? Now, the detail of that is very different. When Biden found the documents, he handed them back. He cooperated. Trump didn't. He tried to hide them, right? Which is obstruction. That's where Trump got in trouble. It wasn't that he had them, it's that he pretended he didn't try. But the people who don't follow politics are not getting that detail. All they're getting is both did it. That's the problem. And so when people go, oh, people didn't vote, the reason his polling wasn't going down is because they weren't listening to the actual indictments, the facts. They just saw him show up in court. And that was reaffirming in their head that this is maybe, why are they trying to go for him? Why won't they just let him run? Just let him run and then we can vote him out. So that was a little bit, thanks for the love hearts, Michelle. But that's the problem here is that we need to understand that not everyone is following politics like we are. And that's the reason why it went up a little bit, because his narrative was winning, right? His narrative was winning. And on top of that, the 18 to 29-year-olds, the young men, You had Rogan endorse him. You had all those people in that sphere endorse him. All the YouTubers with millions and millions. Barron, Trump's son, who is obsessed with watching all these shows on YouTube, got his dad to go on all these shows, right? So, and when he went on there, by the way, he didn't talk about politics. He talked about just normal stuff. Fox News propaganda machine, white greed. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. See, Fox News, there's two different media in modern MAGA movement. You've got Fox News, which is older demographics, but older demographics vote more than younger demographics, right? But also Fox News this is what a lot of times people say mainstream media is dying. Now, in some way that is true, but it's not so much that it's that it, the way they make money is dying, but the views they get is actually not as small as people realize because when Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, they give their viewership, that's based on people watching it live, right? So you're watching it, what's happening. That doesn't include when someone grabs that, sticks it on TikTok, like a clip, like a 5-minute clip, or puts the 20-minute clip on YouTube and then gets shared like a million times, right? So the actual viewership of those shows is actually much higher. It's just that they don't really make money out of that. Like if a Fox News, interview goes viral on YouTube, they don't make a lot of money out of that, right? But they do get a lot of eyeballs, right? So in some ways, they still have more influence than people realize, just in terms of that how much they get shared online. But at the same time, where Trump and MAGA had an advantage over the Democrats was the online space. They absolutely killed the online space compared to Democrats. If you went on Twitter, which was obviously owned by Elon, which actually, which helped, but also, Joe Rogan, all those people. Joe Rogan, it's not just Joe Rogan. He has a whole orbit around him, an ecosystem around him of other comedians who also all have podcasts, and they get millions of views. I mean, the views are way bigger than anything mainstream media get. They get massive audiences. He went on those shows, as I said before, and that gave him. And then what they would say is, how come Kamala doesn't come on these shows? Kamala, and this is the strange thing about MAGA and all these people. They'll say things like, Trump went on Joe Rogan for 3 hours and talked for 4 hours, and the fact that he talked for 3 or 4 hours is to them is like a reason you should vote for him over Kamala. Kamala could never talk for 3. That's what they say. Kamala could never talk. Like the idea, and by the way, I watched the whole thing, right? And 90% of the time, he was just rambling. In fact, at one stage, right, Joe Rogan was making fun of him, like he was going off into different tangents and stuff. Like it wasn't like a normal talking about. He wasn't there talking about the economic policies of Southeast Asia, right? Right? He wasn't talking about the in detailed Section 97.8 of the healthcare system, right? Because we all know it's concepts of a plan. He doesn't know anything about policy, right? So it was all just rambling stuff, like conversational or grievances about how you won the 2020. It was all that sort of stuff. You can go to a psychiatric hospital, right? And you could find people rambling for 20 hours in there. That's not the reason you would want that person to be president, right? But in their head, it's yeah, he can talk for 3 hours to Joe Rogan, but Kamala wouldn't do it, right? So again, it's this insanity of how they base, it's a very immature, very basic way of looking at things. It's a very online way of looking at things. But in that 18 to 29-year-old male demographic, it's quite a big that gets a lot of stuff. That actually works a lot in that area. There is one person who in the Democratic Party who would do really well, and is in fact doing really well. That's Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg in the last yeah, absolutely. Pete Buttigieg in the last couple of months has been going on all these shows. Not Joe Rogan, toxic masculinity. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But you have to the thing is we have to sort of accept the fact that we have to compete in this area as left wing people. You have to compete in this area because we can't tar all people as being toxic, right? We can't tar all men as being toxic. Even if for example, somebody does weights 4 or 5, someone likes to go and do gym work or weights and stuff like that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with being a male who does weights, who's maybe into sports and all that stuff. It might not be your thing. It's not like I'm not madly into that stuff, but if other people into it, that's great. as Democrats or left-wing people, we should embrace those people too. It's when they start becoming like Andrew Tate. That's when you go, okay, well, that's toxic masculinity, absolutely. But, they don't have to be, they don't have to fit what criteria we think they should be because young men, I have a young child, I have a son, and young men go through different stages, right? Sometimes, they're confused like young women do, it's about who am I as a person? What does it mean to be male? What is it, and sometimes it's not straightforward, right? Sometimes it's not, sometimes they say stupid stuff. They get caught up in the wrong things. Whatever's running through the body, is like making them do and everyone, that all young people, male and female, will go through bad stages. And we shouldn't like demonize people for making, mistakes. It's when they that settles it, that sets in as their permanent personality is when to me they become toxic, right? Um, so I've seen friends of my son who gravitated, especially I'll tell you an example, a friend of mine, and this is actually, if you look at statistics, it's not just based on anecdotal. It's actually a lot of people who follow Andrew Tate, the Tate brothers and stuff like that, will generally come from a broken home, poor background, that sort of thing, right? And a friend of, he wasn't like a close friend of my son, but he was kind of in the outside group and they would talk at lunch. And he kind of got into Andrew Tate. And out of all the group, he had the worst home life, right? Really bad home life, right? And my son went to his home once and he just couldn't believe. He was almost scared about what was going on in that home. So, I do have a little bit of sympathy. I want to, if I can bring, not me, but if we could bring some of those people and go, look, we realize you're going through some bad shit, right? And you realize you got a bad home life, but just because what this person is telling you is not going to make your life better, it's going to make your life worse. Blaming women, right? Blaming, the system or the deep state, coming up with Andrew Tate is a grifter. I'll tell you this. I bet he doesn't believe half the things he says, right? I'm sure he's a toxic guy, but what he does is he sets up all these online schools. They're called universities, and he charges. So he gets money from these kids. It's like he's just basically stealing money from these kids, right? So I think again, on the one hand, I can understand. I don't. I see the stuff they say online. It's like it's gross, right? It's gross. But if we can get some of the more, not the really top gross ones, but the ones at the bottom who are looking for some sort of, I don't know, connection or some sort of understanding about why their life is the way it is. If we can bring those people back with economics, I think that's a good thing. If we can bring those people back and go, hey, it's cool. You want to go to the gym 10 times a week? Go for it. We don't care about that. You want to do whatever. You want a plumber? Great. We need plumbers. We need electricians. That's a great job. Excellent job. All right. Support those people because Democrats are working class people, right? And we'll support it on males and also females. So both sides. So we need to be a party of both genders, again. And Pete Buttigieg, that's what he's doing when he's going online, right? When Pete Buttigieg he went on this show called Andrew Schultz, who's a friend of Rogan, and he has a big podcast. He was a Trump supporter, but he's kind of coming around to a lot of them could easily be persuaded the other way. And he was talking to Andrew about toxic masculinity, and he was talking about himself as a gay man. And he said, "Look, I was in the military. I love this sort of like rough and tumble stuff, right? I was a military guy." And he was like, "Oh, I never." And Andrew Schultz was like, "Oh, I never really thought about that." Yeah, it was like you don't have to be like a toxic masculinity to be into sports or guns or whatever you're into, or guns for me is like a weird thing as an Australian. But hey, but yeah, like it's there can be many things that guys can do that just that is male, and if they want to do that, go for it. It's not, if they're not hurting anybody, go for it. So again, I think I think the Democrats, we need to welcome all people back into the party. Young men who maybe don't always say the best things. I'm not talking about the worst of the worst, but the worst, but let's bring them back in. Let's bring in working class people, right? Let's bring in all these people back into the party and not base it on culture wars, but based on economics, right? Because once you have a Democrat in there, like imagine if you had Pete Buttigieg, right? If you had Pete Buttigieg in there, and Pete Buttigieg never talked about woke, right? But just the fact that there's a gay man in the office, right? That says so much. He doesn't have to say every day, hey, by the way, I'm gay. Just by having him there every day and by being supportive of the LGBT community, right, right, um, that's enough. That tells the story, right? So again, I just feel like we can bring those people in, but I think that's part of the reason why we lost because they got this group, right? They lied to this group, and the only good news about young men who are like this is many of them grow out of it. Hi Ashley, I said many of them grow out of it as they get older, right? I know people when I was growing up, which is way before the Andrew Tate thing, right? Who were who you probably could consider like toxic, and then became the most wonderful parents to daughters I've ever seen in my life, right? So, you know, human beings are flawed. We're all flawed human beings, and we need to be accepting of that some flawedness to some degree. Although, again, the extreme elements you can't help them, and we shouldn't be trying to help those people either. People like Andrew Tate, people like in that sort of group are just complete assholes. They're grifters, and they're horrible human beings. But they are taking advantage of some of young teenagers who have no home life, and it would be great if they had another way to go, right? If they had another option besides Andrew Tate. And at the moment, I feel like there's not enough options on the left for them to go, right? So I would love to bring, that some of that, because in real life, I do see those people and I know they're gettable. I know you can bring them back, right? I know you can. So, especially the teenage ones, once they're into late 20s, 30s, it's setting. That toxic thing is setting. It's you can't. It's very hard to break, right? Yeah. But anyway, but that's basically that's how I feel. These people voted for Trump because of a lot of the culture war stuff, right? And they fell for that stuff. And I remember like during the election, and a lot of these people, they're not. I would say like they're not the most, probably the best educated, the most informed people on the planet. Yeah, thank you for the love hearts. Most informed people on the planet, and so they're easy to manipulate. And that's how Trump got away with a lot of his stuff. Because remember during the election last year, he would say like there are kids going to school, right, and then when they come home, they're a different gender. Like, like as if that was happening. Like, but he actually said that. I'm not even making it up. I'm not want to. He literally said that kids in Democrat states were like a boy was going to school, like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, and then coming home as a woman, like a young girl. Like, and he wasn't joking. He actually said this, right? And I just wonder who's believing that, right? Like, who's actually believing that's actually true, right? So again, and I feel Trump says this stuff, right? Because um, he knows he knows he's at the helm of a cult. That eating the cats and dogs car. Yeah, that's right. Eating the cats and dogs. That was like it was like right next to each other. It was like eating the cats and dogs, right? And then kids going to school coming back trans. Like how how is it possible that you would believe this, right? Of course, it's a cult, right? And a big part of MAGA is people who don't, who aren't critical thinkers, as we said before. They're not critical thinking people, right? Um, and and if you're not a critical people think and you feel like this is a cult, but it's not. The interesting thing is it's not just Trump. It's unbelievable in the worst way. Hi, Marnie. Good to see you. Yeah, I know. And I think the interesting thing about Trump is a lot of times people talk about Trump himself, but what I find interesting is it's not just Trump, it's actually Trump and a lot of the people who come with him, right? Um, are from used to be from the other side, and then like for example RFK Jr., right, Democrat, right, Tulsi Gabbard, right. Again, now in my opinion, Tulsi Gabbard was always weird and was always looked to me like she was going to become part of MAGA. The same RFK, right? Again, RFK represents that old hippie type people, who don't believe in modern medicine, don't believe in vaccines, and you know, leeches. Let's get back to leeches, back to natural leeches. Solving a problem. You got a problem. You go to the doctors. They say spend 2 weeks by the sea. That's the kind of RFK doctor thing is. No modern medicine unless it's heroin. Heroin he likes, right? Right, vaccines no, antibiotics not so big on. right? Heroin, yeah, he likes that. He's a big fan of heroin. Yeah. So there are some contradictions there, right? With that. It reminds me like years ago, there's a place in Australia called Byron Bay. I don't know if it's like a famous place. They do like reality TV shows there. Hi Patrick. And it's like a hippie area. It's become gentrified since then, so it's very expensive because it's right near the beach. But it had this hippie element. And I remember walking down the main street. It was like this hippie dude playing guitar, and he had he wasn't asking for money. He wasn't like busking or anything. He just wanted to play guitar to show off his skills. And hi, John. And next to him, he had like a cardboard box, and on the cardboard box it said, 4G causes cancer, vaccines cause autism, and sugars, not processed foods, all this sort of stuff about foods. And so, which I agree with, processed foods are bad and all that stuff. And he was saying all this stuff about health, right? And yet he was smoking. He was like chain smoking cigarettes. Like he was just one after. Like he didn't even have a lighter. He didn't even have a lighter. He would just basically light one in the morning and then just get the next one from the next one and then just start the next one. So he didn't need a lighter because he just one end into the next one and then boom. It was like a chain. It was amazing to watch. And then behind him, he had like a bottle of whiskey that was like half drunk, and it was like 10 in the morning. So this guy here was preaching about, modern medicine, while he's like, off his, all his kids and grandkids are vaxxed. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, like the contradiction, of RFK. But he does represent his ideas, or what he says his ideas do represent that old hippie style, right, of thing, right, which is not necessarily right wing and not necessarily left wing. It's more like libertarian type hippie thing, right? So and he brought, and that's an interesting thing about the MAGA movement, right? It doesn't just represent conservative right wing people. It represents all these people, right? Conspiracy theorists, right? Who could be left, who could have been like from the far, at the time years ago, or anti-vax people, right? Who could be like living in some place in California or something like that. So he represents these different types of groups that the Republican Party never used to really represent, and neither did the Democrats. They were homeless. These groups were kind of homeless, right? So now they have a home, right? So I've always said this. I think there's new homes in the MAGA movement. Assholes now have a home, right? There is now an actual home for assholes, right? They look at Trump and they think, he's an asshole. Thank God there's now a party that represents me as an asshole, right? There's that, right? There's the hi Catherine. There's now the anti-vax movement, the anti-science movement, right? These parties, again, I think a lot of these people probably didn't vote back in the day because they looked at the Democrats and Republicans and thought, they're too much into science. Yeah, they're too much into science for me. But suddenly they've picked up this group, right? The 18 to 29-year-olds, notoriously bad voters. They don't vote. These groups, again, they voted in big numbers for Trump because he was going on all their shows, the YouTube shows. The people who represent these young people were supporting Trump, including Andrew Taylor, who supported Trump, right? So Trump is picking up these extra Democrats. And this is the reason why a lot of the polling that was done doesn't usually work for Trump. You notice a lot of the polling, right, usually shows that he's underrepresented, right? So he usually does better than the polling. And that's because the polling is based a lot of times on who votes beforehand. If you bring in a new group, it's harder to poll. And if you suddenly got a whole bunch of hippies and anti-vax people and all these people who didn't vote before, right, because they didn't see themselves represented in either party, that's hard to poll because they haven't polled before, right? It's much easier to poll when you can find out who the person voted for last time. So he's bringing in a whole group of people. Now, the Democrats need to start bringing some of these people across, not the anti-vaxxers, not the anti-science, and you don't have to create the most cringe thing I ever hear from the Democrats is we need a Joe Rogan of the left. Every time I feel like throwing up every time. It's just so, like, you can't manufacture, like, let's get rid of half of the consultants of the Democratic side, right? Yeah? They're awful. Like, they have no idea about, especially maybe the consultants worked when it was Barack Obama versus, somebody else, John McCain, right? Because you've got one and stuff. Yeah, you've got one. I agree. It's cringy to me too, Joe. Thanks, mate. Yeah, and it's like you, the consultants are fighting an old war, right? The consultants are fighting a war that happened under Obama, and they could have won that war. But now they're fighting a war that's mostly online, and they don't know how to fight that war. They had Kamala Harris on all these mainstream shows, right? But they didn't put her. I'm not saying I don't think she should have gone Joe Rogan. By the way, I think that would have been a big mistake because I think Joe Rogan would have actually tried to. He was absolutely biased. But there was other shows she could have gone on in the online space that would have been less competitive than Joe Rogan, and she could have got a bigger audience. Could you please talk with the Dems? They'll be running in 2026. Yeah. Well, I think they might probably be understanding this. Seeing Pete Buttigieg, what he's doing, to me is like but again, he's the outlier because Pete Buttigieg was doing this before the election. Remember, Pete Buttigieg cut his teeth on Fox News, right? He used to go on Fox News all the time, and that's because he grew up in the Midwest and he's surrounded in his normal life by MAGA people or conservatives. So he's used to talking to these people, right? And he said, "Yeah, I love Pete too." And he said, basically, he said when people say to him, and he used to cop flack for going on Fox News, and he said, "Well, if I go on MSNBC, I'm just telling the people who agree with me the same thing that they already know. But if I go on Fox News, yeah, the majority of them are not going to change their mind, but maybe a couple of them might, and other people might go, oh, at least they're hearing the other side of the story, right? Because on Fox News, they're not hearing the other side of the story by the commentators, by the straight news journalists, right? He does know how to talk with them without sounding condescending. Yeah, exactly. And Marnie, if you see him on this Andrew Schultz show, he's talking to this young, right, edgy comedian guy from the Joe Rogan world, and by the end of it, this guy loves Pete Buttigieg. I mean, he loves Pete Buttigieg, and you hear him talk. So here's the trick. Now, there's a downside to this, and that's reality about Pete Buttigieg is how is Pete Buttigieg as a gay man going to do in the Rust Belt states, right? I'd like to think it wouldn't make a difference, but reality is it might make a difference, right? But we need pod hoppers on every, yeah, that's right, pod hoppers on every platform. Yeah, exactly. And again, like it's basically Pete Buttigieg possibly could win, but it would definitely go against him being gay in that as well. Because what we know about the Rust Belt states and the Sun Belt states is they're more conservative, right? The people there are more conservative, right, than other areas. Like I don't mean economically conservative, I mean socially conservative, right? So I think the way to get around that, if Pete Buttigieg was to run, he'd have to really run, right? Because the gay thing would definitely be working against him, and he would have to make an extra effort not to talk about woke or anything like that because they would love to pin him like he's gay, he's DEI, he's woke, so he's got that working against him. I want to give you an example. Is that if you are like Obama never tried to run on being a black president. He always tried to run again. You remember? Because he knew that could work against him, right? So again, and as I said this before, remember Margaret Thatcher, the old Prime Minister of the UK in the 80s, right? A woman Prime Minister of one of the strongest Western countries in the world was female, and this wasn't last year. This was back in the 80s, right? Why? Because she didn't fit the profile of what they considered mainstream women back then, right? She was tough, she was hard, she was basically a Ronald Reagan of the time, right? So if you're gay, you have to not pretend not to be gay. I'm not saying that, but you have to like concentrate on other things. Your main focus needs to be, for example, Pete Buttigieg is very good about talking about the economy, very good about talking about every people's day, like childcare, right? Childcare exemptions, all that sort of stuff, healthcare, all that stuff. They need to go back to big things, like like Barack Obama did. They need a big healthcare policy. It doesn't have to be Medicare for all if you can't put that through, but something that's significant, right? And a housing one. You have to have a housing one. I don't know anybody in America or in Australia and Western countries who don't think housing is like a big issue, right? And again, it's not just the people who buy them, it's the people who make them. It's the people who rent them, right? It's affecting so many people. And I know parents who have children who are young, who are just starting to leave home, and they can't leave home because they can't afford to rent. So it actually helps the parents to get rid of the kids. That's like, you know what I mean? So it's like so many advantages to home. But I think you need to have one big home one and a big healthcare one because it kind of goes across all the areas, right? And then you have little small ones everywhere else. Unfortunately, what's not going to win it for the Democrats is saying that Trump is bad, right? Or that Trump is a crook and all that. I'm not saying you shouldn't say that, but that can't be your number one thing because it didn't work. People weren't listening to that. People were too either not listening to politics or too focused on their everyday experience, right? Because Trump was telling them that he was going to bring inflation down first day, right? Trump was telling them that this happened under Biden would never happen under me. Trump was telling them all these lies. And maybe when people are suffering, they want to believe the lies, right? You know, so and that's the thing. And the Democrats, they had a lot working against them. To be fair to Kamala, to be fair to the Democrats, and I think Kamala, I feel bad for Kamala because I think Kamala could have done so much better, right? Global Fools, yeah. So Kamala could have done so much better under different circumstances. One, Joe Biden had stepped aside earlier and given them time to do like a primary, would have given them more time to, they couldn't have said, oh, she got the job, it was undemocratic. They couldn't have done all that. It would have been a primary. She could have got, and she got it the rock. She would have had more time, not just a couple of months, to do a proper campaign. And it was obvious that the advisors around Kamala were like getting her to be too cautious. That was the worst thing in the world. You had Joe Biden, right, who they were literally hiding to some degree because he was declining, right? And now you bring in someone new and you're now trying to hide that person as well. But that person doesn't need to be hit because she's actually quite talented. So instead they tried to give her into certain positions and then so the narrative from MAGA was they hid Biden and now Kamala's hiding too because she can't put a sentence together properly. Now, the thing that and to prove that that was a wrong maneuver, Biden should have done the one term like 100%. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Biden should have just done the one term, and he would have been considered the best prime president in a long time. I do believe that in hindsight, Biden will be considered a great president, right? I do really believe that because if you look at the economy, right, all countries were affected by COVID inflation, post-COVID inflation, and under Biden, they brought down inflation more than any other country on the planet. America did. So they came first, right? But that's a hard story to tell when you still got because inflation is accumulative. So it's not like prices are going back; they're just not going up. So it's a hard story to tell. But with hindsight and history, I think Biden will be considered a great president. Yeah, even if they say, look at Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had Alzheimer's. I don't think Biden has Alzheimer's, but Ronald Reagan had Alzheimer's in his second term, and he's considered the hero of the Republican Party, right? Doesn't matter about all this if the counting is compromised by tampering. Yeah. But I think the problem is that the Democrats, right, the Democrats should have basically fought a more open war, right? Once they saw what happened to Biden, Kamala should have done the opposite. Not Kamala, but the people around her should advise her to do the opposite. She should have been everywhere. And I mean everywhere. I don't care, but it doesn't have to be Joe Rogan, but anywhere else, she's here, she's there, she's on Fox News, or I don't just mean one time. I mean, constantly on Fox News, everywhere, bang, bang, bang. They can't do the narrative because here's the thing. The reason I know, I don't know if she still would have won because inflation, as I said, was a big thing that happened around the world, but I think she could have got closer. And the reason I think it would have worked is because the one thing that really helped her was the debate. When she had in a debate with Trump, that was her best moment, right? She dog walked him, right? And I'm someone who'll be honest. If I think a Democrat lost, I'll tell you, right? So I'm not just saying this as some biased thing. She absolutely beat him. Even Fox News thought she won, right? There was that bit where she baited him, right? Because she was talking about crowd sizes and she did it on purpose. And she said, you don't even really get big crowd sizes. And he lost her. He went wild, right? Like she completely baited him and manipulated him through the whole thing. She did amazing. And all that stuff about, well, she can't communicate, she can't do this, she can't do that. A lot of that went away. But then what happened after that is that she stopped doing interviews. Not as many interviews as she should have, right? She should have gone, that was amazing. tomorrow I'm going on that, right? Flooded the airways with Kamala Harris, right? So they can't. Again, this is what happens with the Democrats, right? If if you don't, if Republicans are saying that you're too woke, right? They'll start running ads saying they, them, and you know, you don't care about the economy. If you don't fight back, you cede. You now have given up that territory, and they will define that territory. They will make it work. If you say that Kamala is scared to go on these shows and she only goes occasionally on these shows and stuff like that, and that's what she does, you've given them the ammunition to tell that narrative, right? They've now won that narrative because she's doing what you said they do. She's saying, like, why isn't she going on this show? What, right? Has she done the opposite, right? Has she done the opposite and gone on every show? They would have lost that argument, right? And it was a big argument that they had, especially coming from Biden, who was already doing that, but to a much bigger degree, right? So they need to do the opposite. You need to sometimes in politics, you need to like twist it around 180 and turn it back on them, right? Because here's the other thing, right? Trump was also not going on a lot of shows like CNN, MSNBC. He was going talking a lot, but he was doing a lot of podcasts and he was doing a lot of shows that were favorable to him. He stayed away from a lot of CNN, MSNBC, but it was a harder story to tell because he was still doing a lot of stuff. So if you said, well, how come he doesn't go on MSNBC? They'd go, what are you talking about? He just spent 10 hours today talking on this show. So it's a harder argument to make. So she was also asked on the show what she'd do different than Biden, and she had no answer. Fox said, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And here's the problem, right? Because that's 100% right, Car, because when they asked her that, what she would do differently, and she said if she didn't say anything, she didn't have an answer. It's like, well, are we voting for Biden? Now, if there had been a primary, right? What happens during primaries is they're open. They are then given permission to go against everybody, including the people against, right? But because there was no primary, she was basically just handed that position by Biden and the people around her. She owed a debt of gratitude to Biden. So she couldn't distance herself from the person who gave her that position, right? So had Biden stepped aside early in primaries, there would have been that distance where she could have felt more comfortable. And that, again, I'm not talking about throwing Biden under the bus. I'm not talking about that. But you need to, the consultant tamping down Walt's backfired big time as well. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Waltz as well, they did the same thing with Waltz. Well, this is the weird thing about the Waltz thing. They hired him, right? They wanted him as vice president because he was so good on TV talking to Fox News and like the same as Pete Buttigieg. He's like a Pete Buttigieg, right? He talks to the other side. But then when they bring him in, they take his superpower away from him. That was his superpower. They took it away from him and said, no, we need you to act like Josh Shapiro or, someone like more sort of, someone more sort of, mainstream, whatever. So they took away what Walls was good at, and then he was stuck. He couldn't be himself, right? So these consultants have a lot to answer for. I really hope they're not going to be around at the midterms. I really hope they're not. By the way, I've seen them interviewed on with Ezra Klein and the Pod Save America. I've seen them, all the people interviewed, and they were as bad as I thought they were going to be. Yeah, it was just they didn't take any responsibility for what they did. They thought they did the right thing, and they just and they doubled down on it. So I really hope. But then again, I do feel hope because I have heard a lot of people in the Democratic Party say we need to get rid of a lot of the consultants. Not all consultants are bad; some are good. You need some, but too many and the wrong ones, I think, is a bad thing. Too cautious, I think, is a bad thing as well. The thing is, right? What Trump has done is he's made it so if a politician makes a mistake, you won't get labeled for that the rest of your life, right? In the old days before Trump, you could say something, you could say one bad thing, right? And that would be the end of your primary, right? You'd be gone, right? Those days are over, right? Those days are over. Now, because Trump says 100 crazy things a day. He's normalized being crazy. He's normalized saying contradictory things, right? So he's given in a way. Now, he does get graded on a curve, Trump. So he is treated differently. We need you as a consultant. He does get graded on a curve, right? And Trump does. So he does get away with more than a Democrat would, but it depends on the confidence of the Democrat. If a Democrat comes out and basically says, right, is confident in what they say, and if they stuff up, they just go, so what? I don't care. But, once you start in this day and age, right? Hello, Brittany. Nice to see you. In this day and age, like being super apologetic or super like, oh, I can't, can it work against you? Again, there's nothing wrong with apologizing. It'd be good to get back to a time when people say sorry for something, but you don't sit there and apologize for 6 months. Trump picked that up. He never apologizes, never does that. We don't need to be Trump. We can still apologize and admit mistakes, but we don't let that make us weak, right? We don't let that be a reason for the opposition to attack us, right? Hi, Tracy, and just go, oh, and then when the opposition attacks us, you apologize more. I'm sorry to you, Fox News. I'm sorry, Fox News. No, you got stuff you. What are you talking about, Fox? I'm not gonna be criticized by Fox News, right? So again, you call out the hypocrisy of the other side if they want to criticize you. So Fox News criticizes you, you say, what, Fox News, they lost a $700 million Dominion lawsuit for lying. They literally got caught lying, like Tucker Carlson was caught lying, right? During Discovery. And yet that Tucker Carlson who was caught lying at Fox News during the Dominion lawsuit, that's the truth teller to the Trump movement. That's the person that the Trump movement think is the person who's telling them the right thing all the time. So again, I just think the Democrats need to work out a way to 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 become more confident in how they talk, and to not be as shy as they are, and but at the same time still keep being a Democrat. There's no point copying your opposition, right? Don't become Trump. Don't do this cringe thing of we need a Joe Rogan on the left, please. That's so embarrassing. Please stop. Like only a consultant could say that with a straight face without feeling embarrassed, right? Like you want to manufacture like a podcaster. Like look, it's just crazy, right? It's never going to happen, right? If somebody from the left who's left wing comes up, great. But don't call that person as their left because you're going to make that person's job even harder, right? Don't label that person as, oh, excuse me, are you the Joe Rogan? No, I'm not. Please go away. So, like again, it's embarrassing, like the way that some of these consultants act, right? Joe Rogan didn't come because some consultant made Joe Rogan up. It happened organically over time. He was a Bernie Sanders supporter, then he was this, but he was always a conspiracy theorist. He was always he always had that side of him. That's always been there. So when MAGA came around, it was always going to be his home. If you think about Joe Rogan and you think about RFK Jr., who's their health minister, that's his natural home. A lot of it is, not all of it. Some of it's not, but a lot of it is his natural home. So, again, you can see why a lot of podcasters, young people sort of gravitated towards that. There isn't, the thing about Trump is that he turned Democrats into establishment people, right? Even if you don't consider yourself an establishment, because it's hard not to be establishment. Because if Trump is saying, I want to smash, so they got rid of all these people at the CDC, right? Who basically, there was, I think, 18 of them, and they were looking for basically their job, they're scientists, virologists, people who work with vaccines, and their job was to try to find when a new vaccine comes out, is to monitor the vaccine for safety and all that sort of stuff, right? So RFK Jr. got rid of those people, right? Replaced them with 8 new people, and a whole bunch of those new people are just anti-vaxxers, right? One of them's a psychologist. What's a psychologist going to do with like vaccines, right? One of them's a nurse. No offense to nurses, but they're not experts in biology. But what those two people have in common is they're both anti-vaxxers, right? So he found anybody who's remotely, and then what he did was really smart, and I think this is really smart, is he actually put some really good people in there as well, right? But there's 8 people, right? So if you throw in 3 or 4 3 really good people, they have no power in 8 people. So, but it gives him cover, right? By putting those people in. So if people go, oh, they'll go, what about this guy here? He's like CDC guy. He's like, it's like, yeah, but the rest of them, oh yeah, but you're ignoring these guys. So it was kind of smart the way they did it. They just they threw in some like, you know, reputable people in amongst the loads, because if they did all 8 of them were anti-vax, that would have been even worse. But yeah, so again, you know, a lot of these people are attracted to that sort of side of it, the anti-vax stuff and things like that. And it's going to be hard for Democrats to get those type of people. I don't even know if we want those type of people in our group, but it's made us more establishment, right? It's made it because we're fighting back against crazy. And when you're fighting back against crazy, right, it makes you look like you're, oh, yeah, we love the government. Yeah, everything like that. Well, we love the, and we have criticisms of the government as well. But when you're trying to fight against someone who just wants to smash the system, right, and bring in anti-vaxxers or smash the, the people who do fraud, who look after fraud, that the MAGA Doge people got rid of the department that looks out for fraud for average people. They got rid of that. So then we go, why'd you get rid of that? And they're like, what, you love the government? So again, we're kind of like stuck all the time, like constantly trying to fight on behalf of the government, And I get that because I think government can be a very good thing, but it's not perfect. But it's harder for us now to fight against parts of the government we don't like because we don't want to be associated with MAGA and things like that. So it's made it harder. And it's also made it harder for people to go, that particular medicine, because not all medicine is great. Some medicines like opioids and stuff, there are things that the medical places do bad. It's not all fantastic. Vaccines are great, all these things, but sometimes they don't do the right thing, or sometimes it's about money. Again, for the most part, we like that stuff. We like the medicine and stuff like that. But again, if we fight back against it, it's like, well, it's like we're scared to fight back against that because then we'll be considered similar to MAGA, right? Even though we're only picking out certain bits and pieces, we're not saying the whole system is bad. We're just saying, oh, this drug over here, or maybe this over here, or whatever. But we can't do that now because they've soiled the whole, they're so against government that it makes us overly too much government, in a way, just by default, because you're trying to protect the basics of government. So it's a hard position for Democrats to be in. And then they can make the argument Democrats are establishment, Democrats are, they're just pro-government, and it was like, well, yeah, we are, but we're not saying that it's perfect. We also think there are things wrong with it, but we just don't want to, when they say they want to throw out Medicaid or Medicare, whatever it is, Medicaid, they don't want to replace it with anything. They just want to get rid of it, right? So that's the thing. They made people hate government so much that then they want to get rid of it. But what they don't tell you is they're not going to replace it with something else, right? They just want to get rid of it, right? So it's not like they're saying Medicaid is, we want to keep Medicaid and we want to make it better, right? No, they want to cut it. They want to defund it, right? But if they demonize government enough, they can get rid of all these things that are actually helping people. And then if you argue back, and if they'll argue back and go, you think Medicaid's perfect? No, it's not perfect. But what you're doing is worse, So again, they kind of wedge you into that position there. But as an Australian, I'm very pro-government. I think the government is great in things like healthcare and things like that. So again, we need to work out a way where we can go back to criticizing government, right, without feeling like we're going to become part of, the MAGA Elon sort of crowd and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know all the answers to it, but yeah, we'll see. But yeah, okay, I just thought I'd do this one today. But they still say they're not getting rid of Medicaid. They lie so much. Yeah, they do. They do say that. I know. But I don't think they're ever going to get rid of it. Like tomorrow, you're going to wake up and it's going to be gone. They're going to defund it bit by bit by bit by bit to the point where it's not even worth having. Do you know what I mean? They're going to defund it by default. Because and that's the way. And then they can say, well, look, they can say then they have sort of plausible deniability, right? We didn't get rid of Medicaid, right? It's just that people started not using it. It's like, well, they stopped using it because you defunded it, and you had to jump all these ropes to get it now, so now they're saying it's only for able-bodied people, they're already starting to make it, if you have to start jumping hoops to get it, maybe some people might go, it's not worth it, right? So I think that's what they're gonna do. They're just gonna make it harder to get it, yeah. Um, but, who knows from that point of view. But I just gotta say one last thing before I go, so I've gotta go soon, sorry, is I wanted to talk about, Mike Lee, right? So Mike Lee, right, who posted about the two people who were killed in Minnesota the other day, and he basically posted "Nightmare on Wall Street." Um, I just got to say this, like the MAGA party is the party of assholes, right? And he the fact that he said that, by the way, he still hasn't retracted that. All he did was he added something to another one to say he feels bad about it, whatever. No, he doesn't feel bad about what he said. He feels bad about what happened, right? Trump has not rang Tim Walz or any of those to say anything, right? The the hypocrisy in this area is so, like, I don't know if people watch Piers Morgan or those shows, right? During the election, right, Democrats got painted as being their language was inflammatory, right? By calling Trump Hitler was inflammatory, and that's why the assassination attempts happened, right? They tried to do that, right? Now, what they never tell you is that when a guy who attacked Paul Pelosi at home, right, years ago, who was looking for Nancy Pelosi, right? And this guy had been radicalized by Mike Lindell. I don't know if you remember, Mike Lindell's the pillow guy, and he was obsessed with the election was stolen. He loved Trump, right? He was doing a tour about the election being stolen. This guy had been watching Mike Lindell films about the election being stolen. Now, remember Trump, and they blamed Nancy Pelosi for January 6th, right? So this guy was blaming Nancy Pelosi. This guy had been posting on Facebook threats against Nancy Pelosi for about a year, right, beforehand. So he shows up at their home. He's from Canada. Shows up at the home, which is I thought Canada. No, can't be Canada, but it was. It's, but he shows up at the home. He goes down there to San Francisco, and he stays at this temporary accommodation. And she's not home, so he attacks him, right? And the first thing that Elon Musk does, he's just purchased Twitter, is that he says, he says basically, there's a slight chance that this might just be a gay relationship gone bad. So that MAGA and Elon, remember he just purchased Elon, Twitter, started saying that this was a gay relationship gone wrong, right? And the reason for that is because Paul Pelosi was wearing underwear. It was like 1 a.m. There's an 81-year-old man wearing underwear. One is strange. That's a strange thing. Anyway, so they started pushing that conspiracy, right? And then Trump never rang the Pelosi's, never rang Nancy Pelosi and said, "I'm sorry, what happened to your husband?" Even though her husband had been radicalized by his lies, right? Never said that, right? And then Trump about a month later was joking about it, was joking about the assault, right? So never said, it's not a joking about it, right? People online on MAGA were joking about it. Everyone, right? And if you ask MAGA, a lot of the people at the bottom to this day, they still think it was a gay relationship gone mad, right? Gone bad. So these people live in like a different planet. But now compare that to Trump being attempt assassination last year. What happened? Everybody ranked Trump, Biden, Kamala, Obama, Bill Clinton. Like literally the whole Democratic Party ranked Trump and said, "I'm so sorry, what happened to you?" Like, it's just like, but again, and then last year all we heard was inflammatory action, inflammatory words from Democrats. It's just so insane. It's so maddening that one side is so bad on this side, and yet they're complaining that the other side's worse. Like yeah. So again, you can't argue. Like it's just these people are maddening, because it doesn't matter. Democrats can come out and say the nicest things about, sorry, Trump, that you got assassinated, all those people. And then Trump comes out and makes fun when it happens to the other side and just jokes about it. And they still grade him on a curve. They grade him on a curve. It's like he's graded in the same way a toddler is. If a toddler says something like that, you go, no, you shouldn't say that. But it's a toddler, so you let them get away with it, right? That's how Trump is graded, like a toddler. Now, if a Democrat was to do that, it would be like 24/7 news for the next 6 years because Democrats are not graded on a curve. They're graded like an adult. right? So again, it's the whole, graded on a curve thing just drives me nuts. True, a toddler. Yeah, 100% car. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to me. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to my newsletter, the Joe Thomas newsletter. I'll send a video out later. You can even donate a quick one-off thing on buy me a coffee. It's just like a one-off thing on my video. You can send out later. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I really appreciate it. Have a good day. Bye.